if it's okay with everybody, we'll just get started.
Yeah, and I don't have any opening remarks other than to remind everybody, as you well know, CAFR comes out, I guess, the end of this week. So we're getting close to the budget time.
Yes, exciting. I do have a few things to say. And first, introducing new members of my team or team members who have taken on different duties. Let me start with acknowledging John Falchicchio. I have nominated John to serve as the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development. As you know, John has served as my Chief of Staff since the start of my administration and the Transition Director before that. So I look forward to working with all of you during John's confirmation process. I have also nominated Karima Woods to serve as the Director of the Department of Insurance, Securities, and Banking. Karima has most recently served as the Director of Business Development at DEMPED, and I want to congratulate Karima on taking on this wonderful opportunity. I also want to introduce, to you Ronan Goldstone, who you all know. Ronan is now the Director of the Office of Policy and Legislative Affairs and will be my chief in dealing and working on bills, legislation, and all legislative issues at the council. Ronan most recently served as the Manager of Government Affairs at Washington Gas, and before that was Chief of Staff to the Ward 5 Council Member and Chairman of the Committee on Business and Economic Development, Kenyon McDuffie. I also want to introduce Gianelle Rivera, who is the new Director of the Mayor's Office on Policy, and you will all have known Gia because she served as the Deputy Director of OPLA for a number of months. And finally, Brian Hume is filling Gianelle's position as Deputy in OPLA. So with Ronan, Brian, and our OPLA team are here to work with you each and every day. And we also have a full agenda. You will hear from Peter Newsham and Clinton Lacey on public safety issues specifically related to young people in the district. Julia Irving is the Director of my Office of Community Affairs, and you will hear from her about constituent services across all 8 wards. And Attorney General Racine has a number of items for the agenda. Without objection, Mr. Chairman, I do want to add, before we get to our formal agenda, I asked Dr. Nesbitt to provide a brief update on kind of DC and national trends and experiences related to the coronavirus and the district's posture in preparedness. So, Dr. Nesbitt, if you would come up for a brief update, we would appreciate it.
Good morning.
Good morning. As many of you may have seen more recently in the media, a lot of information about the 2019 novel coronavirus. There has been experience with outbreaks of coronavirus in the world, primarily with what some of you may be familiar with as MERS and SARS. We refer to this as the 2019 novel coronavirus because this strain is different. It began in December 2019 in Wuhan, China, with some individuals having pneumonia, which at that time we were not aware of what the cause of that pneumonia was. In January, there was more information. There was a lot of genetic testing done, and we now know that the cause of that pneumonia is what we are referring to as the 2019 novel coronavirus. There's still a lot to be learned about this novel coronavirus in terms of how it is spread, in terms of how it could potentially be treated, its mode of transmission, initially not thought to be spread person to person, but possibly now spread person to person, and what its total incubation period is, and a number of other things to be discovered scientifically. There's also been additional updates in terms of, as recently as yesterday, a Travel 3 update, which means that all U.S. citizens are encouraged to not travel to China unless it is extremely necessary. So what that means is that we should see many of our U.S. citizens who are in China returning to the U.S. Initially, people were returning to the U.S. voluntarily, but now we should see more people being encouraged or being brought back to the U.S., including some of our diplomats. Similar to other coronaviruses like MERS and SARS, these viruses tend to be spread by, amongst animals, but this emerged amongst humans and originating at around a market with seafood and animal products. We have not seen human-to-human spread in the U.S., which is reassuring. But again, as these viruses change or additional information becomes known about the virus, that is a possibility. Based on the current available evidence that we know, the signs and symptoms of this novel coronavirus is very similar to the cold and flu, but it can rapidly progress to more serious symptoms like pneumonia and has resulted in death in some individuals who have contracted the coronavirus. The incubation period, or what is more commonly understood as the time from exposure to the virus and the onset of symptoms, is about 14 days. The reason why that's important for people to understand is that when you have individuals who return from an area where there's been exposure, primarily what we're talking about now is from China, originally thought to be Wuhan, China, but now there are other parts of China where individuals are infected, and there is now understood to be person-to-person spread, is when people come back to the United States, we tend to be looking at them or concerned about them having signs or symptoms for about 14 days or 2 weeks. As of January 27th or yesterday, there are about 110 persons under investigation in 26 states in the United States. And 5 of those individuals were confirmed positive in 4 different states. So California, Washington State, Illinois, and Arizona. There are additional, out of those 110 persons under investigation as of yesterday, 32 of those tests were negative, and 73 of those tests are still pending. Currently, only the CDC can test individuals for this novel coronavirus. State laboratories like our Department of Forensic Services Public Health Lab is unable to provide testing at this time. Whenever there is an emerging infectious disease, commercial labs, public health labs, state labs typically do not have access to the test kits in the U.S. until they have been FDA approved and such. So our state lab is expected to, in several weeks from now, be able to do testing, but they currently cannot. So any individuals who would be suspected would have to have their test kits sent to the CDC for confirmatory testing. All travelers with the travel nexus to Wuhan are coming in to 5 airports in the U.S. and being screened. But now that there are more infections throughout China, there is the potential for individuals to come in through other airports outside of those 5 original airports, which were JFK, Atlanta, LAX, San Francisco, and O'Hare. There is a plan underway to expand screening, the CDC recommended screening of individuals coming in from China to additional airports. It is our understanding that Dulles would be prepared to be able to do that screening based on their posture and their ability to have screened individuals using CDC screening techniques for Ebola when that occurred. CDC is not yet reporting person-to-person spread or transmission in the U.S., as is being reported in China, but again, this is an evolving situation, and so we will be keeping up with the evolution of science and updated information as that becomes available. So what have we been doing in the district and in the region since December? We keep up to date with information with the CDC. We also have what are called health alert notices that we send out through a network of all licensed healthcare professionals and our healthcare, hospital and healthcare systems in the district. Our first health alert notice went out after the 2 days after the CDC's first health alert back on January 10th. This provided guidance to all of our healthcare providers in terms of how to screen individuals, how to collect specimens for testing, and how to communicate with the health department 24/7, 365. When additional information in terms of we knew exactly what the virus was, it was no longer just a pneumonia of unknown cause, we sent another update on January 23rd. This provides detailed information in terms of how to communicate with the health department 24/7, 365. We walk our healthcare providers through the testing process. We help them identify what we call persons under investigation or patients under investigation. We provide information in terms of how to self-isolate, if the person doesn't need to be hospitalized, exactly what they need to do, and we facilitate the testing with the CDC.
So, Dr. Nesbitt, so why don't we notify everybody of where we can find the latest information and information as it changes? And we should also think about making it, putting it closer up on the front page of our website. So we're going to the DOH website?
Yes, so all of that information will be made available on our website. We have stood up an incident command with HCMA and the health department.
Okay.
And we meet daily, and we have updated weekly meetings with the region. And all of that information will be front-facing on our website, including updates around confirmed cases.
Okay, DOH.dc.gov. Thank you,
Yes.
Dr. Nesbitt. Thank you. Okay, so now we will move on to our next update, and we will start with Chief Newsham and Director Lacey. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, Mayor Bowser. Good morning, Chairman Mendelson and Council. First I want to start, we were getting ready to release a new policy on handling juveniles by MPD. Brought that to the attention of the mayor, and she thought it was important that we brief the council before we made a public release of our policy. And that's why we're here today, in case you have any questions about our policy. I want to thank the Attorney General and his team who worked very cooperatively with us on establishing this policy. We can go through the slides real quickly, and then we can take any questions that you might have about our policy on juveniles. So as everybody knows, juveniles don't have the brain development as adults, and they need to be treated differently, particularly when they're getting into interactions with law enforcement. As we all know, too, there have been a number of incidents that have gotten a lot of attention in the media where MPD was handling juveniles, and there was a lot of concern. So whenever there is interaction between the police department and the juveniles in our city, it garners a lot of attention. And if that attention is negative, it can chip away at the trust that we're trying to build on a daily basis. So we got together with the Office of the Attorney General. We got our teams together. We made some adjustments to our policy. I think right now our policy is going to be the best practice in the country. When we got together, we looked at 31 other police departments that was similar to MPD. We looked at their policies. And some of the changes that we came up with, did somebody say something? Some of the changes that we came up with are on the next slide. So the first thing is with regards to handcuffing. It used to be the default for police officers when they were making an arrest was to handcuff. Now the policy of the Metropolitan Police Department will be if a juvenile is 12 years of age or younger, the default will be to not handcuff the juvenile unless they are a danger to themselves or to others. So the default is going to be, in all cases, not to place handcuffs on juveniles 12 years of age and under. For juveniles that are ages 13 to 17, it will be up to the officer's discretion. In the past, it was not. Officers would traditionally handcuff somebody that they were arresting in that age range. And what they're going to consider is the severity of the crime, and again, whether or not the juvenile is a danger to themselves or to others. With regards to arrests, now this policy on arrests, custodial arrests, has been a policy that we have had with our SROs at the schools for a very long time. We're going to implement limiting arrests across the police department with regards to custodial arrests. Provided it's not a threat to public safety, our police officers are going to do an on-scene investigation if a juvenile is involved, gather all of the information, release the juvenile to a parent or a guardian, and then bring the information to the Office of the Attorney General to decide whether or not a custody order is appropriate in those circumstances. For those of you who don't know, since 2016, juvenile arrests in our city have actually been trending down. We actually have 20% fewer juvenile arrests than we did in 2016. And the same, we want to continue that pattern because we don't want to unnecessarily introduce young people into the criminal justice system. And I think this is an excellent change to our policy. The last piece on there, the third circle on there, is eligibility for diversion. When we were reviewing the circumstances under which children are given diversion opportunities after arrest, there were a couple of instances where we thought we could make changes which increased diversion for some of our juveniles that are brought into custody. The considerations that will be given is whether or not they have a criminal record, if they've had contact with the criminal justice system before, but that just increases the amount of diversion that's available for kids. To make sure that the policy sticks with our members, we have the ability to do online training, which will begin on Friday for all members of the Metropolitan Police Department. We will be able to complete that relatively quickly, and our professional development cycle starts in January, so all of the members are required every year to come through professional development training. We will ensure that all of our members are trained with regards to the handling of juveniles. And you can see a couple of organizations that we've been in touch with that are assisting us with that training to ensure that we have the best training that we can for the members of the Metropolitan Police Department. The last piece, and I think I talked about this a little bit already, is that we did have at MPD, with regards to our juveniles, we had as many as 13 different directives, so we consolidated all of those directives into one policy. The policy will be available online, as all of our general orders are. And then the last piece to this is the Office of the Attorney General has actually established a hotline. It's a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week hotline for members of the Metropolitan Police Department. When they get into a situation where they have questions regarding a juvenile arrest or a juvenile contact, they could reach out to the Attorney General, who can provide the officers on-scene information about how to proceed with the case. So I think that we, like I said when I started, I think we're going to have one of the best policies across the country with regards to the handling of juveniles, and I could take any questions that you all might have.
If I may, I'm sorry. If I may, I just want to repeat and reinforce the extreme leadership that has taken place on the part of the police chief and certainly Kevin Donahue and the entire team. The chief is right when he notes that throughout the country the practice is, vary widely. And this was really an opportunity to understand the vagaries, the ambiguity, and then set a course, as the chief did, to go ahead and establish what will be the best practice, I think, in the country. Leadership doesn't occur alone. Of course, he's got great people with Kelly O'Meara and Maureen O'Connell, and we stand ready in any way to help. Also note that you got this through the FOP, which sometimes cannot be an easy process, and so, in every regard, MPD led and should be commended.
Charles.
Thanks. Let me start by adding my thanks as well. This obviously is an issue we've talked about in oversight hearings for the last year or so, and we've had several high-profile incidents took place last year. I think to the credit of Chief, your team, and working with Carl to take that look and bring this information together to help inform these policy changes should be commended. So I really appreciate the hard work that went into this, and I am optimistic that this is going to really set the stage for what we want across the whole country. I was going to ask if you could give a little more detail around as you have your officers have to make that, I guess, kind of 2 points. One is an age determination, because obviously not every kid is going to have ID with them to help say they're 12 or they're 13. So in what ways do we help the officers be able to determine the age, which sounds like it's going to kind of help inform which path that they go down? And then can you also talk a little bit more about where the individual discretion of the officer is either supported and reinforced from a decision of a supervisor or is made on their own? And I guess the other part of that is, as we roll out this new policy, in what ways will we create some monitoring to make sure that as individual officers are exercising their discretion, we're reviewing what those decisions are in a lot of the work that we also do to make sure that if there is potential bias that we see play out, that we're tracking that in a way that helps inform the trainings that take place.
So I think a lot of that will be covered in the training that we provide for our officers as to whether or not the handcuffing was appropriate. I think it's going to require on us to be auditing circumstances where kids were handcuffed, and we can take a look as whether or not that was appropriate or not. I think you bring up a good point with regards to identifying juveniles out on the street. It can be difficult in some circumstances if the child is resistant to providing information. In those cases, depending on the circumstance and depending on the offense, we may call CFSA to come and assist us with the case. It may be a situation where we'll have to take the child into custody. But I think that the main focus of the policy is to prevent young people from being introduced unnecessarily into the criminal justice system, and to ensure that we get a second set of eyes on those cases that don't impact public safety by the Office of the Attorney General as to whether or not to proceed. I think that, I think you have a lot of familiarity with this when you're dealing with kids, that the safety of the kid is of the most importance. And I think that's why we didn't run into a problem with the FOP, and the FOP was very receptive to this, because we all in policing seem to understand that we want to ensure, particularly at MPD, that when we're dealing with kids, that we're dealing with them in an appropriate, in a safe way.
Yeah. Well, that's great to hear, and very glad that you got that through with FOP. I guess real briefly to the Attorney General, how does this hotline work? I mean, obviously, if the 24/7 nature of it, we ought for officers to have confidence and trust that it's going to be there when they need it. How are we staffing that in a way that it really will deliver for when the officer needs to ask that question and get that guidance?
Yeah, so when you say 24/7, it's got to be 24/7. And so we've got a dedicated set of individuals who will have the full coverage and will field a range of questions. As the chief noted, one of the questions may be whether an arrest is the logical step, or perhaps given the circumstances of the alleged offense, the kid's history, whether that may mean that arrest isn't necessary. Instead, what we might do is issue a written custody order where the child appears with the parent or a responsible adult at a later date. So those are the kinds of issues that can come up from time to time. Liz Weiser, our Public Safety Division head, is in charge of fundamentally putting in place the 24/7, and we've also worked well with the chief and our policy person, Elizabeth Wilkins, on that.
Okay, great. Well, thanks. Well, again, I appreciate and appreciate the work that it took to get here and really be able to respond to what we saw in what seems like a very deliberative way that brought a lot of great thinking to the table. So I look forward to following how we implement this and working with you. Thanks.
Robert?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, thank you very much for this work. I think this is a strong step forward for the city, and I really do appreciate all the work you and your team have put into this. Just a couple technical questions to understand. On the, I'm not sure which page this is, 2 or 3, one of these bullet points notes that you're going to encourage officers to apply for a custody order when there are no immediate public safety concerns. But after custody order, in parentheses, it says arrest warrant. So can you help me understand?
That was for folks who don't know what a custody order is. It's the equivalent of an arrest warrant for an adult. So that was just for clarification for people who, the lay person that may be looking at this PowerPoint.
So they won't be arrested on the scene, but there'll be a custody order to ensure that they show up for whatever proceeding.
Well, the idea is to actually allow the child to be turned over to a parent or guardian on the scene. Okay. Then we apply for a custody order. If the custody order is approved by the OAG and then by a judge, then the child could be taken into custody at a later time, and that could also be done through the child turning themselves in with their parents, which often happens in minor juvenile cases.
Thank you for that clarification.
Anita?
Yes, very quickly, can you just take a look at the third circle, expanding eligibility for juvenile diversion in lieu of arrest? Can you talk a little bit about what that would entail? What are some of the reasons a young person would go into the diversion program as opposed to something else?
So the diversion program generally is a program for kids, and this is post-arrest, so this is after a child has been taken into custody, which gives them an opportunity to be released to their parent or guardian without getting a formal charge. And so there's a set of criteria that we have for diversion. When we looked at that criteria with the Office of the Attorney General, there was a couple of circumstances which we thought excluded some first-time offenders on minor offenses, and we tweaked that part of the policy a little bit so more kids will be eligible for that opportunity when they are taken into custody.
So, in other words, there's a likelihood if it's your first encounter with law enforcement and you are 14, then you'll be likely to go into a diversion program if charges are brought against you.
If you meet the criteria. So with the new policy, I think that what we will see is there'll be a couple of opportunities to avoid entry into the criminal justice system. If we present a custody order to the OAG and the circumstances suggest that maybe we're not going to proceed criminally in the case because there is adequate supervision at home, or maybe there's something else we can do with the kid to prevent them from being involved in that behavior. That's one chance for a child to avoid being introduced into the criminal justice system. The second piece is if there is a custodial arrest and the kid is taken into custody and they're a first-time offender and they meet the eligibility for diversion, they can be turned over to the parent in lieu of having a formal charge. So that and then they get another opportunity. My understanding, sometimes the court social services will give them an opportunity for diversion too. So I think in Washington D.C., you don't find that in a lot of other jurisdictions where our kids are given a lot of opportunities not to be introduced into the criminal justice system. The other piece that I will add to this is that policy, particularly with regards to policing, is constantly evolving. I do believe that this is probably the best policy in the country, but we're also open to listening to feedback if people have other suggestions how we can better handle our juveniles.
Yeah, I ask these questions because I feel that the diversion process is a very important tool, and I'm very hopeful that we have criteria that make sense, because in the community, one of the biggest complaints that we have are from the residents feeling that it's the young people that are creating, quote unquote, the havoc, so to speak. And so just trying to understand what might happen if you, for instance, throw rocks at an automobile and break the window and you're caught doing this. How would we treat it as opposed to someone who brings a weapon in and around the school and tries to assault another person? So just trying to understand how. I think this is a very important area for all of us to understand in the city, that there are systems in place and young people can be referred to them. So that's why I was asking.
Okay.
Thank you. The Trayon, and then we're going to move on to the next presentation.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to know from you, Chief, what are some of the barriers or standards you're setting or in the training that helps the officers understand when they're using their discretion what warrants using handcuffs or not during the training?
So I think that what we're trying to teach our officers is really because these incidents with young people and the police receive so much attention, that you can really have an impact on your reputation as a police department if it's not handled properly. And that's the kind of the philosophy we're trying to put into the minds of our officers, is when they do come across a situation where they do have to make a custodial arrest of a juvenile who's between the ages of 13 and 17, that they should the mere image of having that kid in handcuffs could paint the police department in a negative light. So if they can avoid it, we're going to try and have them avoid it. Now again, if it's a really serious offense, if the kid is a danger to himself or others, then we're going to say then probably it's in the best interest to put handcuffs on.
So a lot of the interactions I've seen have been more so groups, a group of police officers and a group of juveniles, and it's kind of like a going back and forth. What is the police department's discretionary tactics in managing situations like that?
So the big thing in something like that, and sometimes you'll see the provocation. Our police officers sometimes being purposely trying to be provoked by some young people, and our officers are really trained to de-escalate those situations, to try and talk the things out and calm them down. And I mean, I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of videos where our officers have engaged in that way in preventing situations from escalating.
Madam Mayor?
Thank you. So next we're going to hear from Clinton Lacey, who is our DYRS director, about a new initiative that I've asked him to spearhead to get to our young people before they get into any trouble.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to distinguished members of the council and all present. We're really happy to be part of a process, as was described through the Chief's presentation, of furthering, expanding our options to respond appropriately and accurately according to the level of behavior being presented, and to have more options. And so the DYRS Achievement Centers, in our view, presents an added opportunity to provide options and exit strategies for young people to exit dangerous situations or avoid them altogether, to be engaged. And so we'd just like to talk a bit about that. Our achievement centers are a core part of our work. Of course, DYRS operates 2 secure facilities, and we're probably well known for that. We operate YSC, the detention center, and then also New Beginnings in Laurel, our deep end for those young people who have been committed. But we also have a huge responsibility for community supervision and engagement of young people. In fact, the majority of our young people committed to DYRS are in the community. And so our achievement centers serve as the spaces where we engage our young people in a host of services and supports and activities. And it is our intention, and what we will do is expand open the doors wider than they are now to young people who we're all concerned about, who are in the community, particularly at particular hours, which we'll talk about moving forward. We have achievement centers. We have 2 at this time. One is at 450 H Street Northwest, and the other is at MLK 2101 Martin Luther King Avenue and Southeast. And those are the 2 sites where we provide these services. It should be noted that DYRS was the first juvenile justice system agency, and DC's system was the first in the nation to adopt what we call positive youth justice approaches to engaging young people. And it really relates to something that the Chief mentioned with regards to the brain science and brain development and understanding the developmental stage that our young people are in and what are their core challenges, of course, but what are the core areas of need and opportunities to build competency. And so positive youth justice is an approach that works with justice-involved young people, or what we traditionally have called at-risk young people, vulnerable young people, and activities and programs that are particularly targeted to address those developmental areas. So it's not just about responding to behavior or punishing behavior. It's about engaging young people to prevent that behavior. And so the achievement centers provide this space where we practice positive youth justice. First of all, providing a safe space, a place where young people can feel safe. So much of what we're seeing and hearing in the community, in addition to what might be called traditional delinquent behavior, revolves around a lot of fear on the part of young people, and therefore engaging in dangerous behavior, even at the extreme level of carrying weapons. And so safe space becomes very important. Positive youth engagement program is what I just mentioned in terms of providing education, workforce development opportunities, creative arts, recreation, working on core life skills and core individual competencies. This is beginning with self-esteem and coping skills and conflict resolution skills, and a full array of engagements with young people to keep them positively engaged, to keep them interested, and to get them to want to come back and to be part of something positive where they're safe and where they're having fun, but where they're developing the skills that they're going to need to be not just out of trouble, but to be successful young adults and part of our community. Also, we provide service assessments and referrals. And so our achievement centers, as we open up the doors to the young people in the community who aren't just committed and under our care, we'll have the opportunity to try to begin to assess what are their presenting issues and make appropriate referrals to our sister agencies in the district and other community-based organizations who are out there doing great work, but are in need of better bridges to build connections. Transportation assistance, helping young people at the end of the day or at the end of the evening get home safely. Get to be at home, be it foster homes, be it group homes, whatever that may be, that we help young people get to where they need to go. And so the population we currently serve, as I began by saying, are our committed young people in our achievement centers. And we have a significant number of those whose commitments have expired but continue to come to the achievement centers and continue to connect with our staff and with our community partners. But this expansion now will open up to those who may not be known to the court, may not be, certainly aren't committed, and may not be part of any of our justice systems as such. Perhaps they may be, but they're in the community in the evenings, and often without positive things to do, and often falling into negative and dangerous situations. And so we will be expanded to that population and open up our doors to provide all that I've described to that population. The staffing, which is critical, of course, is something I want to discuss. DYRS youth engagement professionals, that means our social workers, that means our youth engagement specialists, and our team who are highly trained and continuing to stay on top of the emerging best practices and evidence-based practices in engaging young people, particularly those who are most vulnerable to falling in or getting into trouble. And of course, our partners, Credible Messengers. Credible Messenger has been a major part of our work at DYRS. They partner with our case managers. They're in the community. They engage families. They go to homes. They're on the blocks. They're in the streets, building relationships and really helping to guide our young people in positive direction. I would just mention quickly that we have we piloted a partnership with the public libraries and we began at Shaw Library, where we were asked to bring Credible Messengers, where there were some situations between young people from different blocks who were engaging and who were fighting and getting into some various types of scuffles, which we know can often very quickly become very dangerous. And Credible Messengers were brought there not to be security, but to form relationships and begin to engage the young people in those communities and have them to come into the library, not just out in front of it, and while in there, engage in positive activities. And that went very well, and we're actually exploring possibilities of expansion. So I just share that as an example of the role that Credible Messengers can play in engaging our young people in partnership with other staff. Lastly, to begin, we're looking at the data and what does it show us in terms of the peak hours where our young folks are getting into trouble. And it's not, the data shows that it's not what some may think in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. Or, of course, not a whole lot of good things happen at 3 a.m. in the morning with young people out in the street, for sure.
Nothing happens.
Nothing at all, as my grandmother told me.
Nothing.
And she said after 11, actually. But the data is showing us it's really 8 to 11, 8, 9, 10 o'clock, right? And so we are planning to open up our achievement centers Monday through Thursday, as you can see, until 9 p.m. But then on Friday and Saturday, which the data is also pointing to as peak times during the week, until 11 p.m., where we'll be there available to engage with young folks. we're partnering with MPD, with other sister agencies, and community partners, all of whom are looking for outlets and opportunities for young people in the evenings to open up our doors. And we also have our credible messengers and others doing our own form of street outreach to make sure we know where our kids are at all times. And that will be a part of the process of getting young people there. And we're hopeful that our partners in the community and in the government will begin to know more about us and be able to see us as an option, and that young people will be brought there where they can be safely engaged. I'm happy to answer any questions that might be.
Let's start with Treon White.
Thank you, Director Lacy. I attended the Achievement Center last night on MLK.
Yes.
And I guess the Credible Messengers had a training there that I attended, and I noticed that Miss Princess and Mother Love had a group that is there at the center working with some young people last night. I guess my question is for those who are providers on the DYRS. They're having a hard time getting the youth to come in. What are some innovative strategies that you are using to engage young people to get them off the streets to come to that safe place in that facility and other facilities like that in the district?
Right. This is an ongoing process in DYRS, but one which we think have made a significant improvement in terms of participation of our young people. So every young person committed to DYRS has an individualized success plan, or what traditionally would be called a case plan. And so these plans now are describing, obviously with the input of the young person and their family and their credible messenger, what their schedule will look like for the week, what programs, what particular services will they be engaged in. And we are turning up the intensity with regards to essentially mandating participation. And
Is that new? Is that new, the mandating part? Because I heard they was not mandated.
In a systematic way, I would say that it's new. It's the next level. We try to balance giving young people the choices to determine which of our programs and services and activities would they like to engage. And we're going to continue to do that. We provide things like music. We provide graphic arts, entrepreneurship, and various activities, as you know, barbering and various things. And we want young people to make choices, and with the hope that that's something that they'll stick with. But what our motto is, and it's not just lip service, and what we believe we have the real opportunity to do is to know where every single one of our children are at all times, period. And so with that goal, which we think is attainable, and perhaps nothing is ever perfect, but that's certainly what we're striving for, we will, when a young person doesn't show up to barbering, we will know that, and something will be put in action to go find that young person or to determine why they're not where they said they would be. And so I would say that that's always been our value and our desire, but we have a more systematic approach now to ensure that that's taken place.
Charles.
Thanks. Director, thank you very much. I was really glad you spent a good amount of time talking about the credible messengers, because I think they oftentimes go unsung. And I was going to ask, kind of to the point of my Ward 8 colleague, about what type of innovations we can do to help make sure young people and kids are coming to spaces. But one of the things I think is so brilliant about the credible messenger is that they go also to where the kid is at. And so Can you talk a bit more about any plans on ways in which we continue to expand and grow that effort? I think it's deeply meaningful and impactful, and it's the type of thing that sometimes you don't necessarily even see it from a metric standpoint, because they're helping de-escalate and help divert negative things that may otherwise take place. And so it's hard to measure the thing that doesn't happen, but they have a really positive impact in those young people's lives.
Yes, I think the greatest example of our improvement or expansion in that area with regards to outreach is to really look at the time and the resources that we have, right? So we have a group of credible messengers. There's 24 hours in a day, and so we're now prioritizing these hours of their time. And so some part of the day they're literally taking kids to school or making sure that they're in school, right? Or just going to the home and doing direct engagement with them. But now we're prioritizing evening hours to go out. So credible messengers will use their time. I mean, these are paid full-time jobs for credible messengers. So built into their job description now is street outreach, is actual community outreach, spending more time going out, And if a credible messenger knows where all their young people are, they can be part of a general outreach in communities. And so that's really the direction that we're going. And it's also a better syncing up credible messengers efforts with our case managers, who are ultimately responsible for community supervision. It's our case managers that coordinate all these services, that have the authority to seek a custody order and those types of things. So at the end of the day, they have to know this, but syncing up and coordinating with our credible messengers to do more street outreach is the approach that we're taking. And in fact, shifting some of our own staff's hours, right? You know, working with young people is not a 9 to 5. Some of it is, right? But we know after 5 o'clock there's a lot more work to do, and so we're making some changes with regard to staffing hours as well.
Thank you. Anita?
Yeah, I wanted to just sort of go back to my colleague's question about how to get the young people engaged and want to be a part. And I know that's key because we've talked in the past. And it's just, in my opinion, we're talking about, back in the day, it was the use of a computer. Today, it's probably, you're going to learn how to code, you're going to build your own app. That might be intriguing. You're going to make a music video, something that really galvanizes you so that, there's like a point system. You're doing this, you've earned the points, you've moved to the next level, now you're going to do a new instrument. I don't know, something that really captures their imagination. In my previous life, I had the occasion to work with those who were in the system, I'll say, young people, and it's a very difficult task, as you say. And it is more than a 9 to 5. And so I'm just, I'm looking for answers for how we're going to engage our young people. I think this is a great start. I truly do. And I hope that we'll want, as a community, that we will want more of these engagement centers in other parts of the city.
Yes.
Well, if I could jump in, and thank you, Councilmember, for that question. And I dare say that every agency of the government has some role to play in making sure that we are engaging young people. And when we look at the types of investments that we're making together from zero all the way through college years, those are quite robust investments. I think that now we are very focused on the synergies between all of those investments and making sure that our residents are going to trusted locations to take advantage of them. Just a few weeks ago, I think you know that CFSA spearheaded our family success centers that were funded last year in last year's budget. And they are in, I think, 6 locations now where trusted community organizations that have been effective in communities are in the community. And we are touching families to ensure that they are taking advantage of all of our services. We know that this model has been effective in, I know sometimes it's hard for us to believe that people don't want to come to our government offices or to City Hall or to a DHS center, but they actually don't. But so if they can stay in their communities and get effective service, we think that we will continue to be more successful. We also know that we have to be more targeted in our approach. And part of a conversation that came out of our CJCC is how we can be more targeted on the law enforcement side, but also on the human services side, and better identifying. And sometimes it's easier, quite frankly, with the adult population, better identifying the adults that we know that need critical services so that they won't be victims or offenders. And we need similar strategies for young people. The population that Director Lacey works with, quite frankly, he has his arms all the way around them. And we would like for that population of young people actually to be broadened, because there's another group of young people that the courts are responsible for. And so the more interaction that we can have with DYRS and the young people that are being supervised by the courts, we know the more success that they will have. There was a question asked about where we think it's more likely or most effective to grow the credible messengers. And we have asked Kevin, Deputy Mayor Donahue, to be focused on schools that need the most help with safe passage, and how we can work with effective strategies to deal with them. So we look forward to being able to talk with our schools community and you with what that looks like.
Alyssa.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Lacey. Good to see you.
Likewise.
So we know how popular our summer youth employment program is. I hear from young people all the time. They want jobs, they want money, they want employment. So two thoughts on what you were saying. So first, on attracting young people, has there been any surveying of young people? What would actually bring them to these centers? Like asking the young people themselves, what could we offer that really would be attractive? And then the second thought on the link to employment. This is something I'm very interested in. Barbering, I've heard this from also our ONE's office. There's a barrier to entry in barbering if you do it legally, which is the licensing, which might be a barrier for our young people. But I'm thinking about like hospitality, for example, cooking, which is like something that might be attractive to young people. It's good for us. Not only it teaches, it's a skill that is very marketable in our economy, as well as just really helpful in terms of your life. I wish I learned how to cook a lot earlier in my life. Still learning. Yeah, it's a valuable skill, and I've heard from the hospitality industry. They're looking for workers, right? We need skilled front and back, especially back of the house folks. And has there been any outreach, for example, to our hospitality industry to say, let's bring people in, let's teach a skill, a real marketable skill in which they could start earning money. Because that's what we hear all the time, this link. How do we make this link to employment, which might put them on a path that might be a lot more positive?
Yes, thank you. I think that's an excellent question. And to begin with the latter, yes, in fact, we have ties and relationships with hospitality and restaurants. And actually, many of our young people have gotten their food handling license.
Oh, great.
We have kitchens at both of our achievement centers and culinary arts. In fact, we have culinary arts out at New Beginnings as well. And so that is a promising area where young people have gotten food handling licenses to work beginning in fast food restaurants, but also working with caterers and things like that. And so our job developer and our workforce development team has great relationships in the district, and we continue to place young people. As I'm sure you know, with regards to our population, they cluster at around the age 17. So it's right at a critical point where education, of course, is critical, and we have to get our young people to finish high school. And one of the things that we've learned, and that is emerging in the research and workforce development, is that young people might go through a relatively quick job readiness workshop process and get placed on jobs, but they're not keeping them because there's an array of issues, whether they're just support issues like stable housing, and those types of things, and also other just life skills. And so what we're taking is the longer view on helping young people to develop those skills so that we don't set them up for failure, but they have a more viable opportunity to sustain the employment. But we can do this in a way that can put a few dollars in their pocket so they can get stipends for internships and service learning projects. And of course, summer youth employment is a great opportunity for that. So yes, we are mindful and always trying to expand those connections for jobs, but we're spending a lot of time going deep to address those foundational issues with young people so that an ongoing career is really viable. With regards to your first question in terms of survey, that's a major part of how we select our providers who we end up contracting. Asking young people what they like. They can participate even in the interviews of the prospective providers. And it's no secret, it's no surprise, I should say, that our most popular activity at the Achievement Centers is music production, video production. So now the trick for us then is to seize that opportunity. And what we're saying is if we have young people in the room doing music, we shouldn't just be doing music. We should be talking about life skills, about decision making, about conflict resolution. Even if it's under the guise of cooking or making music, it's an opportunity for us to bring those other life skills to the table. So that's our approach as we try to engage our young people, to get them in the room, but then the trick is make them want to come back. And that's what we work on.
Madam Mayor, why don't we move on to Ms. Irving?
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Director Lacey. Next, we're going to hear from Julia Irving, who is the Director of our Office of Community Relations. Also, you hear me refer to them as the Moker's Office. And Ms. Irving is going to talk to you about largely about a monthly activity that I conduct in every ward around community walks and generally how we work with your offices on constituent requests.
Good morning and happy Terrific Tuesday.
Thank you.
We are going to take a journey into Mokersville. So as we are affectionately called, we're called the Mokers. However, for those that may not be familiar with us, we are the Mayor's Office of Community Relations and Services. And we are a mighty, eager, and service-oriented team of 28 individuals that work 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. And our team, we're really the primary constituent services office that provides rapid and complete responses to requests, concerns, and questions for all 8 wards. And there are a couple ways that our over 700,000 neighbors can actually engage with our office. It could be that maybe you're calling on the phone. Perhaps you actually want to venture down to the Wilson Building and visit us. Or it could be that we're engaging you when we're in the community, attending community events, or attending community meetings. Or it could actually be that while we're proactively going out every Tuesday and Thursday and sweeping the neighborhoods, it could be that we actually engage a neighbor at that time. So on this journey through Mokersville, we're going to say that someone actually calls into the office. When they call into the office, our coordinators receive that call. And at that point, we're triaged. We provide a triage. And so we're trying to figure out what is your specific concern, what ward do you reside in, and who best can assist you with that. At that time, the coordinator will then transfer that call to our specialist. However, our coordinators are also prepared to manage that call as well. The specialist will get the necessary information, and we will utilize 311 to actually input the service request if it is a request that appears on our 311 system. If it's a human services request, we also work with our human services partners to immediately address it if it doesn't appear on 311. From our 311 request, our team will actually go out and they'll put eyes on the concern. So we'll work with our various district agencies to make them aware of this concern that has been expedited or enhanced rather to our office. And then we'll work with our agency partners to really figure out how we can get that concern addressed, because oftentimes if the neighbors are contacting our office, they've actually engaged our respective agencies. After that time, concurrently rather with that, our team is actually gathering data. So every time a neighbor is calling our office and we're inputting a 311 request, we're actually looking at that data to see what are the occurrences here. And we look at that data from a ward-centric base. And so based upon that information, our data team will then share that information with our respective ward specialists. Our ward specialists, once a month, they have what's called a core team meeting. And that meeting consists literally of the core agencies, the core service agencies. And we're actually reviewing the data that has come into our office, looking at trends in service delivery to see how we can improve those service deliveries. After our core team meeting, we actually want to go out and see, is this actually occurring in our community? What are some other services, or what are some other issues that may be impacting that service delivery. So we conduct a core team walk. And again, the core team walk could be our core service agencies along with the Metropolitan Police Department and some of our Health and Human Services partners. After we conduct the core team walk, oftentimes the situation has been remedied. However, in instances where perhaps there's additional, we need to delve a little deeper because maybe it may be a process issue, that information is captured on what our team compiles in their weekly report. That weekly report goes out to all of our leadership in addition to our points of contact at the respective agencies. In addition to the weekly report, twice a month, we actually have a roundtable of all of our deputy mayors, chiefs of staffs, where we're really digging down and we're mining into that data and that information that's reflected in our weekly report to really brainstorm collaboratively how can we address this issue so that we can ensure that we are providing top-level services to our neighbors. Then from our roundtable discussions, again, our team is constantly going back out, assessing the situation. We're engaging with our neighbors just to get their eyes and ears on it to make sure that the service has actually been addressed. But then we actually have an opportunity to sit around the table with our city administrator and do what's called a deep dive, our 311 stat. And that's where we're really looking to see how our service delivery corresponds with some of our public safety concerns to make sure that we really are targeting our efforts in those areas and we're really streamlining the service delivery. And then from our 311 stat, through our walks, through our roundtables, through our core team meetings, all of that information then informs what are our Walking Wednesdays, our mayoral walks. And that's an opportunity where many of you all around the table have received invitations because each month we walk in a respective ward in our beautiful city and we engage with our neighbors and our stakeholders so that we can actually see the community through their lens. So we can actually hear their voice and they can walk us through their daily journey so that we can really ensure that those city services are being delivered to them. And then naturally, after the mayoral walk, you can't walk without follow-up. So our team is really there. Within 24 hours, we post a report of every concern that was noted on that walk, and we provide a 30, 60, and 90-day follow-up on that. Some may say, what does that follow-up look like? Well, this is what it looks like. These are our top issues by agencies, and you will see that DDOT has the most concerns, and that's naturally because we walk on DDOT's surfaces. So it's easier to see those concerns. And then, of course, because we're walking, we can kind of see what's on the street, so obviously DPW would be there. And then we also have some Health and Human Services concerns that we see along our walk. And so all of our agency directors participate in the walk so that in real time our neighbors have an opportunity to engage with those directors, to have that intimate relationship with them, but also to share their concerns and obtain the clarity that they need on the processes and make sure that their voice is truly being heard. In addition to just looking at our top issues by agencies, we're also looking to see what are the actual top issues. And again, we use this data when we're meeting in our core teams, when we're doing our roundtable discussions, and also when we're doing our deeper dives. And then, of course, we meet out with our respective ward representatives once a month. Again, we're a team of 28, so sometimes it's once every other month, but we're really digging down to look into that ward because we cannot take a cookie-cutter approach to service delivery in the District of Columbia because each of our communities presents with unique needs and unique services. And so we break down those issues by the ward, and again, that goes back to our core teams, which goes back to the weekly report, which goes back to our ward tables that we have. And as you'll see from our mayoral walks, these are some of the highlights from our walks. Some of our wins that we've received. Our neighbors expressed concerns about the renovation status of the Thurgood Marshall School, resulting in funding being allocated to them. That was something that was brought forth through our Moms Club in Fort Lincoln. And then we also had a couple of neighbors that expressed concerns about Southern Avenue. I am sure Councilmember Gray is very aware of the challenges we had on Southern Avenue. Our neighbors were more than vocal about the concerns on Southern Avenue, and in real time, we met with Director Meridian to just figure out how we could expedite that because of the safety hazards, but also the quality of life concerns there as well. And then we've also partnered with the Perry School because during our walk, a lot of our neighbors and our stakeholders were saying, the District of Columbia has a plethora of resources. However, we're not accessing those resources. So we decided to go to the Perry School and actually provide those resources for them. And on the pictures on the walk, it allows you to see that during our walks, we engage with our youngest residents, but also we're looking at the issues in real time and making sure that we're holding our agency directors accountable. And our team members, they're also sharing what they see, again, when they're going out there 2 times a week and or they're responding to any violent incident that occurs in the city in real time. And so if anybody ever wants to connect with us, we work very closely with your constituent services team. So many of them are quite familiar with us. But if ever you want to journey on down to the 3rd floor, to the room with the green wall, that is Mokerville Center, and we welcome you. Any questions?
That was a very good presentation. I don't think there are any questions, so thank you. Was there anything else you were presenting, or did we turn to the Attorney General?
That's it.
After such an uplifting and positive, spirited presentation, I'm happy to bring you down. No, not at all. Not at all. No. Good morning, Mayor Bowser, Chairman Mendelson, council member and staff. Congratulations, John, for getting the nod, earning it, really. We're pleased to give you an update on 2 issues that we've been focused on. Worker misclassification, wage theft, that's one issue, and then civil rights. Before we do that, I do want to underscore something the mayor said, which is that DYRS, truly is a leader nationally in what they're doing. They've got the best leader, I think, throughout the country in Clinton Lacey. And don't take my word for it, one of the preeminent groups that focuses on juvenile issues has identified the District of Columbia as the site of its June conference because Clinton is here and will be going to New Beginnings and doing other things. And the mayor also is right when we focus also on the terrific work that DHS is doing. Some of these folks, don't get credit every day, but they work extremely hard to try as best they can to do what's really incredibly difficult, and that is somehow replicate family into the lives, and love, as Clinton would say, into the lives of young people, who really have a ton of instability in their lives. So I think that, the work is really important and it's going well. With respect to worker misclassification / wage theft and protecting civil rights, Chairman Mendelson, Chairman Allen, Workforce Oversight Chairperson Alyssa Silverman have really made significant investments in FTEs and, of course, money into the Office of Attorney General. We've also worked well with DOES on matters, and we're looking forward also to a February 19 hearing that Councilmember Todd has scheduled around civil rights, where we can do more. So I'm going to let my team and some of the investments, I think with the one exception, everybody you're going to hear from is a new FTE within the last couple of years that you all, council and the executive, have given us. So first, let me have Kate Konopka. Oh, there you are. They're quick. Come up. Kate is, really happy to be back in D.C. She worked in D.C. for the U.S. Attorney's Office here, SEC, Department of Justice, worked at a couple fancy firms, and is now back, and she's running our public advocacy division. That's the division where we're, suing affirmatively folks that need some suing.
Thank you, Attorney General, and good morning, Mayor Bowser. Good morning, Chairman Mendelson, council members, and everyone.
Closer.
More? Normally, no one has trouble hearing me. I'm really happy to meet everyone here today, and I welcome the opportunity to speak with you about the important work that the Public Advocacy Division is doing to combat wage theft here in the district. Let me start at the beginning. What is wage theft? Wage theft is when employers fail to provide earned pay or benefits to their employees. And these violations often affect some of our most vulnerable residents who are employed in low-wage jobs and can include the failure to pay minimum wage, to pay required overtime pay, to provide paid sick leave earned by employees, and to subvert these and other wage and labor laws by misclassifying employees as independent contractors. The misclassification of employees not only harms workers by stripping them of the protections provided by the DC laws, but also hurts competing businesses that play by the rules by allowing the violator to substantially cut labor costs, and hurts the district's fisc because these violators are able to evade the payment of payroll taxes. The OAG has been aggressively investigating and litigating against these violations for a little more than 2 years now. Specifically, the council passed legislation authorizing our enforcement and funding 2 attorney FTEs to take on these matters in the spring of 2017. These attorneys came on board in the fall of 2017, and since then, the Public Advocacy Division has investigated over 30 wage theft cases. To date, the Attorney General's office has recovered over $1 million in restitution for hundreds of workers and has obtained over $1 million in penalties for the district. We continue to investigate and litigate over a dozen open matters and build on the enforcement presence in the wage space in order to protect district workers and ensure compliance with the district's laws. One of the dedicated Assistant Attorney Generals that serves in this enforcement effort is with me today, and I'm now going to turn the discussion over to Randy Chen to provide some additional detail about the OAG's successes against wage thieves and some ideas about how we can continue to grow and serve district workers.
Thanks so much, Kate. As Kate mentioned, my name is Randy Chen. I'm an Assistant Attorney General here in the Public Advocacy Division, where I handle a lot of the wage theft work. To start, I just want to reiterate some of the words Kate said with respect to that our wage theft enforcement work is really dedicated toward and strategically targeted toward protecting the district's low-income workers. These folks might be vulnerable to common wage and hour violations like failure to pay minimum wage, failure to pay overtime, and they also might not have the resources to seek legal advice or have the resources to vindicate their claims. We've sought to target pattern and practice type cases. These involve numerous affected workers. We want to maximize our impact, and we want to maximize our deterrent effect. You'll see that many of the cases I go through today involve systemic violations. So, for example, the failure to pay minimum wage over time, that can add up to hundreds or thousands of dollars owed to many, many workers employed by a company. And it goes without saying that when you recover this kind of money for an individual who might be living paycheck to paycheck, might be struggling to make ends meet, that's significant. It's really significant. And it can also add up across workers to impose significant liability for the company. So we've now been doing this work for a little over 2 years now, and we just want to share some of our significant cases with you. So starting off on the slide, you'll see one of our first cases, our first significant cases was a minimum wage investigation of a company called Mitra, which owned 2 KFC franchises in the district. This case was one of our earliest settlements back in May 2018, and that was for in total about $20,000, returning over $10,000 to about 18 workers, and another $10,000 in penalties to the district. And as we've been operating, we've sought to continue to expand the size of our cases in terms of both recovery and the number of affected workers. So on the next bullet, in April 2019, we settled our first 6-figure case against a company called Airway Sheet Metal, which is a local sheet metal company that operates in this Mid-Atlantic area. This was an overtime investigation, and the total settlement was for $115,000, which returned over $110,000 to about 40 workers, and another $5,000 in penalties for the district. In addition to our investigative work, we've also brought cases to court. So in the summer of 2018, we filed a lawsuit against Turning Natural, which is a local juice cafe with several locations here in D.C. We alleged minimum wage, overtime, and paid sick leave violations. And that case settled, the the following year in August 2019 for about $15,000, which recovered $10,000 for 22 workers, another $5,000 in penalties to the district, and also retroactive paid sick leave for the 7 workers who are still employed by the company. And now more recently, in the past month, we've successfully resolved some of our more complex and significant cases that have required a greater amount of case building and preparation. So in December of 2019, we settled a worker misclassification and overtime investigation of a company called Rock Spring Contracting. This is a local drywall contractor, and that settlement was for over $280,000. The amount returned $56,000 to over 75 workers and another $225,000 in penalties to the district. Now, at this time, you might be asking how come the penalties here are higher than the recovered wages, and the answer there is penalties are often higher in worker misclassification cases because DC has a specific law that sets out specific penalties for misclassification itself. And this works to deter the industry-wide harms that Kate mentioned that worker misclassification can affect on the industry at large. And then finally, in January 2020, we settled a lawsuit we had filed back in summer 2018 against Power Design, Inc., which is an electrical subcontractor, alleging worker misclassification, minimum wage, and overtime violations involving over 500 workers. This was our biggest settlement to date and our first in the $1 million range. The settlement total was for $2.75 million, which recovered $879,000 for hundreds of workers and a $1.8 million penalty to the district, as well as an additional $50,000 in support for local workforce development initiatives. We're proud of this case, and we see it as a victory for workers and fair competition in the construction industry, and it also represents an upward trend in the size and scale of the types of cases that we've been tackling since we got started back in 2017. We look forward to continue fighting for district workers through pursuing these kinds of systemic cases.
So the question is, would you all like to dig in now if you have any questions on wage theft and misclassification, or would you like us to go and give you a brief on civil rights, then ask questions about both?
Why don't you do the full presentation?
Okay. Come on up for civil rights. Is that Michelle? Tony. Sorry, Tony.
Good morning, Mayor and Chairman Mendelson and council members. In April of 2019, the Attorney General was able, closer, the Attorney General kicked off his, one of his 2 primary goals for his second term, which was to establish a civil rights section. We hired our first FTE of the 3 that we were given by the council. Thank you very much. And we started with a mission, and our main mission was 3-pronged. One was to investigate and challenge any discriminatory practices within the District of Columbia as it relates to district residents, visitors, students, whoever is within the district. We also wanted to educate and talk to the community about these anti-discrimination laws and how to make sure that their rights are not being infringed upon. And third, we are actively engaging in legislative attempts to strengthen the district's anti-discrimination laws, and as Michelle will talk about later, to add a hate crimes, bias-motivated violence amendment or act so that we can address hate crimes against people of color and others in the District of Columbia. Since we started in April, we have more than 25 investigations in progress. We filed 3 lawsuits, and we've settled 1 case prior to filing a lawsuit, and that was against Renewal by Anderson, who refused to talk with people about installing windows east of the river, which is where I live. Councilmember Grayson, Councilmember. And so we were able to settle with them for $50,000 for that discriminatory practice. And we are continuing to go after people for discriminating for Section 8 vouchers, for refusing to come east of the river. Those are the 2 primary ones we have seen. And I will turn it over to Michelle Thomas, who is the chief of the Civil Rights Section, to tell you more about our work.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I appreciate it. As you just heard, my name is Michelle Thomas. I'm the chief of the Civil Rights Section here at the Office of Attorney General. In that role, I see that one of my primary responsibilities is to make sure that the specific civil rights needs and concerns of the people of the district are addressed. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I'm going to do that. One of the very first things that our office did when we decided to start the civil rights section was to listen to the people. We held over 5 listening sessions across the district this summer. Those sessions were held with members of every ward, as well as council members, ANC commissioners, as well as people from the community who attended. At the start of the session, we first talked a little bit about the D.C. Human Rights Act, or the HRA, which is one of the most expansive anti-discrimination laws in the country. It protects individuals based upon 21 protected traits in the areas of education, employment, housing, and something that they call public accommodations, but most people just recognize it as goods and services in the public. At those listening sessions, we had over 100 people, and we heard them loud and clear. One of the things that the individuals told us, was that housing discrimination in all of its forms is a top priority throughout the district. And we drilled down and we heard more about housing discrimination, and we were able to identify that source of income discrimination as well as access to loans and credit were some of the top priorities. Now, when I talk about source of income discrimination, what I'm really saying is that it's the form or the type of income that you receive. Here in the district, what we've heard about with source of income discrimination is the most prevalent form of source of income discrimination is discrimination against individuals who receive some form of housing assistance. So we're talking about things like housing vouchers or rapid rehousing. We also heard a lot about the protected traits, about what are the individual traits that people feel that they're being discriminated against. We heard a lot that race, as well as sexual orientation and gender identity, remain one of the most prevalent barriers to life opportunities such as education and employment. Now, some of the things that I mentioned in terms of our listening sessions, you'll be able to see we have our civil rights report, which goes into more detail about the listening session, a little bit about our methodology and the questions that we asked. But it's important that I mention that to you because not only the information that we received in the listening session, but the information I receive on a daily basis in my outreach and my efforts is what drives our section. So I want to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing because of what we heard. As Tony mentioned about some of the cases that we have, I'm going to first talk to you a little bit about housing discrimination. We currently have 2 pending cases in D.C. Superior Court related to housing discrimination. And in those cases, 2 housing providers in Ward 7 and Ward 8 discriminated against voucher holders. And they did it by first posting discriminatory advertisements and then by denying individuals who had vouchers from renting, housing in areas that already have affordable housing issues. When we filed those cases, we also filed what's called a preliminary injunction to enjoin or to stop them from their discriminatory behaviors. Not only did we file lawsuits, but one of the other ways that we try to protect people in the realms of housing discrimination is to try to prevent it before it even happens. And that's why we partnered with organizations like Zillow and Apartments.com, which are online retailers, to help prevent the discriminatory ads before they even get online. And so we work with them to create filters so that any ads that say things such as no vouchers, no rapid rehousing are taken down before individuals are able to see them. But we also wanted to make sure that people were educated about the rights, about the anti-discrimination laws in the district. So we worked with those same organizations to update their information. So we talked a little bit about housing discrimination, but we're also important to understand that individuals throughout the district need to have the same access to services. Tony mentioned a case called Renewal by Anderson. We also have another case that's currently pending in the D.C. Superior Court, where we're going after a home contractor who refused to provide services east of the river. And in our renewal case, we were able to obtain $50,000 for the people of the district. We were also able to obtain injunctions so that they would continue to stop discriminating and also train their employees to make sure that this form and other forms of discrimination do not continue. As Tony mentioned, we have about 24 other cases that are going forward that are currently investigating. So we look forward to enforcing these laws and others. So I told you a little bit about our education and outreach. I told you about some of our practices in terms of enforcement. I now want to tell you a little bit about our legislative work. Currently, we have 2 bills pending before the council. And when we thought about these bills, we modeled them after other states like Massachusetts and California and Vermont, states that are known for having strong civil rights and consumer protections. It's our belief here in the Office of Attorney General that our office needs to have the same enforcement tools as every other state so that we can protect the people of the district. And so let me tell you a little bit about the bills that we have pending. The first bill is the Attorney General Civil Rights Enforcement Clarification Amendment Act. It's a long title, but basically what we're doing is just reinforcing the Attorney General's ability to enforce the district laws in the public interest. We also want to make sure that we can obtain significant civil penalties for those bad actors who choose to try to discriminate in our district. We also want to make everyone know that discrimination in any form, whether it's housing or race, is not acceptable here in the district. We have a pending hearing in that matter coming up in February. The second bill is the Hate Crime Civil Enforcement Clarification Amendment Act of 2019. And before I go into too much detail on this bill, I want to give a shout out to MPD for providing statistics about hate crimes in the district. I was very fortunate to attend an event, I believe it was last week or maybe 2 weeks ago at the U.S. Attorney's Office, where some people from the MPD were there talking about the statistics, talking about the processes that they go through in order to capture them. And we really appreciate that partnership. But the civil rights, the Hate Crime Civil Enforcement Clarification Act that we've presented gives the Office of Attorney General a cause of action in order to bring civil actions against those who commit bias-motivated violence, as well as any other acts that hinders the federal and district law. We believe that we can pursue these, between these two bills, by having these, we're able to truly enforce the interests and the needs of the district. Specifically, what's unique about this bill is that we would have civil enforcement authority regardless of whether or not the U.S. Attorney's Office chooses to go forward on hate crimes. So now you know a little bit about the civil rights section. We ask for you to partner with us not only in our bills but also in tips. If you hear anything about any forms of discrimination, please contact us. We want to make sure that the district is a place where people can live, love, and play without any fear of discrimination or hate violence. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for investing in these FTEs. They know what they're doing. Happy to take on any question you might have. Randy, you might come here. Great.
Mary, you had your hand up.
Thank you very much for those presentations. I wanted to focus on the issue about housing discrimination, especially with respect to vouchers. Two things I found troubling when I looked into this. One is that in terms of our Office of Human Rights, apparently they don't have the resources to do what is conventionally done in some of these circumstances, whether it be with respect to vouchers or other forms of discrimination, that is to send out testers. And really that's an excellent way of ferreting out discrimination in housing. So I think, linking with that office, and maybe we should be thinking in terms of the budget about more resources for that. In addition, I have a bill in, a section of which deals with this matter, and Councilmember Bonds, thank you very much. I believe you scheduled a hearing on the bill in May. Among other things, the bill says that specifically no discrimination on the basis of source of income vouchers in ads by landlords, because what we've seen is that it's not just discrimination in terms of people who turn up and have a voucher, but it's discrimination in terms of other landlords who say they won't take your voucher amount into account to meet the requisite requirements that they have for income to be able to rent in a particular building. So I would hope that we could beef up the work of the Office of Human Rights so that they could send out testers, and I would hope that we could get this specific advertising with respect to houses so that there's no discrimination against people because they have vouchers, or no discrimination in the sense that they don't use the voucher amount to see whether the person meets their requirement of income.
Thank you. We look forward to working with you in regards to that May hearing and on the issues of testers. I don't know, Michelle, whether you want to add anything. I should note that Michelle was at OHR in a previous iteration.
Thank you. We completely agree. When we talk about source of income discrimination, one of the first ways that people think about discrimination in this form, of course, are discriminatory ads. So individuals who see advertisements that say no vouchers. One of the things that is particularly problematic about that form of discriminatory ads that's different from any other form of discriminatory ads is that when people see an ad like that, they don't need to go back to that organization. It's not like when someone tells you, oh, we don't have one apartment available or we don't have 2 bedrooms available. You'll try again because at some point in time you know it becomes available. However, when someone identifies no vouchers allowed, people don't feel any need to go back because obviously no vouchers are allowed. So that's one form of discrimination. We hear obviously about discrimination where people who have a voucher are not are not allowed to rent. But one of the things that you mentioned are other forms of discrimination that prevents people with vouchers from renting. We see things like the minimum income requirement, security deposits for individuals who have vouchers, or other terms or conditions, sometimes even higher pricing for people who have vouchers. And so all of those issues under the umbrella of housing discrimination, specifically related to source of income discrimination, are things that our office are working on, and we look forward to partnering with you to make sure that our laws are strengthened in that area.
Robert.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just clarify
Very
the
briefly.
date for the hearing, it's February 20th,
Oh, better.
not May. We could never schedule anything into May. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Attorney General, and to your team for this work. I want to just talk a little bit about wage theft. As recently as earlier this month in a hearing that the Committee on Facilities and Procurement chaired, we heard concerns from local businesses alleging that they have been underbidding contracts by other companies that do not follow the law, which obviously is something that's very concerning to all of us. It's something that all of us have heard. I was heartened but really concerned within days, either a couple days before, a couple days after the most recent hearing, to see the success of OAG in this power design case. This was an issue that was brought to the council, was brought to my office, maybe other offices, some 2.5 years ago, after folks working on this didn't seem to make traction with the Department of Employment Services on enforcement here. And then at the tail end of this lawsuit, we see a settlement for almost $1 million of lost wages. And so this is something that I think, if there is any culture whatsoever in this city that accepts worker misclassification or wage theft, then we're going to continue to see some of our local businesses hurt. And clearly, we're going to see our residents hurt from these wage issues. And so it seems that, if I understand what happened in power design correctly, it seems that there are some gaps in understanding what happened here may help us to diagnose this issue. I don't see anybody, Mayor, from DOES here, but if you would and your team would be willing to work with my office to understand what happened there so that we can make sure that this isn't an issue that goes beyond power design.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Alyssa.
Oh, terrific. Well, first I just want to thank the Attorney General, the entire office. This has been a great return on investment, I know, in the wage theft space, and I heard from my colleague that an investment made through her committee brought about the Office of Civil Rights FTEs. So first one on a process issue in the housing discrimination. I was trying to find the email right now, but this is a tremendous issue, and we receive emails from residents about advertisements that are discriminatory. We've been forwarding them to OHR, so should we also forward them to you?
Definitely.
Okay.
So I don't know if I can give a plug, but OAG Civil Rights at DC.gov.
Okay.
We look into any tips, especially tips related to housing discrimination. We look for patterns and practices to make sure that we can eliminate them before they actually get.
Okay, wonderful. I look forward to working with you. I also actually just want to emphasize something that my colleague Robert just said, and that The efforts that Randy and Kate have made are certainly significant for low-wage workers, but it's also a tremendous issue in terms of our small businesses and CBEs, in that they feel there's an unlevel playing field. When we don't enforce our wage laws, we allow people to underbid, basically, and they're not following the law. And I just want to emphasize the worker misclassification issue is that they're saying people are not working for them when they're spending 40 hours a week working for them. That's, at my understanding, essentially what happened in power design, which means power design can underbid a project because they're not paying paid sick days benefit. They're not paying any kind of benefits that you would receive if you were considered an employee of the company. And this is a big issue. It is a big issue in terms of our own government, in terms of bidding on projects. We hear this all the time from our small businesses. So this is a tremendous issue. And I think what Power Design case does is hopefully it will be an effective deterrent. And it's also just a signal to, I think, everyone doing business in the city that we will enforce our wage laws. But this is an issue not only for workers, but for businesses as well. So, again, thank you all very much.
Randy, can you briefly?
Yeah. I just want to just comment on that briefly. So, our office commissioned an expert report on worker misclassification specifically. We commissioned 2 expert economists, and they actually crunched the numbers on what misclassification costs workers, what it costs the industry, and what it costs the district. And what the report found was, at the very low end, companies are saving as much as 16.7% on labor costs by not paying overtime, by not paying into payroll taxes like the district's unemployment compensation insurance program. All those costs hurt workers, they hurt the industry, and they hurt the district. And the one thing I just wanted to float is that, one thing that we've seen in other jurisdictions that have tried to tackle this issue, in the city of Pittsburgh has done it, the state of New Jersey has done it, New York City as well. They've assembled task forces that have kind of been an advisory kind of task force to look into an issue. They're authorized to make reports. They're authorized to make recommendations and provide advice. And we would welcome, if there's any interest at this table, future conversations on that issue.
We're looking into doing that, so we look forward to working. I'll just say it also benefits the bad actors. I think that's what I want to emphasize, is that the people who are not paying our workers fairly are benefiting when we don't enforce our laws.
Absolutely.
I had 3 things. In the area of wage theft and worker misclassification, the cases that you put up on the slide, there were no court judgments. Just curious if there have been any, and the settlements seem to be under $1,000 per worker, which kind of struck me as I would have thought it would be more than that.
So to that note, the power design case is a consent order. It was a litigation that was settled via a consent order. We have not, if your broader question is whether or not we've taken a case all the way to trial and received a judgment, that has not happened yet. We filed about 4 to 5 lawsuits in all since getting off the ground. Most of these were in 2018. And we actually had a recent victory in December, actually, where we did win a summary judgment ruling, which was a court judgment against a home health care provider in D.C. That case was a company called JD Nursing and Management, and they provided home health services around D.C. That was for a little over $200,000. Your next question about the amount returned to workers. So cases kind of vary depending on what the investigation discovery turns up. In a lot of our cases, what we'll usually see is there's a number of workers, 20, 30, 40, who are owed in the neighborhood somewhere in the hundreds to the thousands. We have settled some cases where workers are taking home over $10,000 apiece, but those are rare, and we didn't highlight them on the screen. But I'm happy to go into more detail with your office if you'd like to follow up.
And let me add just one point. As Randy and Kate indicated when they started, the employees who are working these jobs, on a given year, they're making anywhere from $25,000 to $36,000. And so when they're being shortchanged $1,000, $3,000, $5,000, that's a significant part of their salaries. And of course, if they're living in the District of Columbia or even in the area, we know the costs aren't getting lower. And so what might appear to us to be small restitution to them based on lost wages, back pay, and that sort of thing is actually quite significant to their income. We might nonetheless consider in legislation, we're happy to contemplate this and consider it with you, Mr. Chairman, a way to, let's say, reallocate monies more to the workers than even the penalty structure that goes back to the district. So we're definitely open to that.
I get that it's important. I just was struck by it. And of course, if a worker is cheated out of $1,000, which can be a lot for that worker, it's not a lot in terms of litigation, which is why I think the work that you're doing with multiple workers and these larger settlements is important. I had a second question with regard to the civil rights work. You kept referring to, several times you referred to there being 21 protected classes, but as I recall, the way our Human Rights Act is worded, it says that discrimination for any reason except merit is illegal in the district. So we don't really need to have enumerated classes, although I recognize people want them. Am I misreading that?
Well, we do necessarily need to have protected classes because, one, it's important to identify the specific form of discrimination. There are some considerations of personal traits or identity factors that can be considered. For instance, in certain instances, credit can be considered. Under certain contexts, these other matters can be considered. So part of the law is not only to enumerate the specific traits that can be considered lawfully under different areas of the law. So for instance, we talk about 21 protected traits, but there are 4 different areas, and not all 21 protected traits apply to different areas. For instance, family responsibility is something that clearly is something that's important in relation to housing, and so that's something that's particularly designed in that area. Whereas other areas, as I mentioned, credit is something that you can consider as it relates to employment in certain contexts, or things that you can consider in relation to housing. So it is important to specify the protected traits and specify under what conditions you are able to consider those in making determinations.
Well, maybe I meant the question a little bit differently. I'm not arguing against specifying traits, but it's as if I think some people believe that if a trait isn't specified, then therefore discrimination is permitted, even though our law says discrimination is illegal except for merit.
So the portion, and I probably need to maybe see if I can clarify this in another way. The goal of the Human Rights Act is to make sure that the only things that are considered in relation to decisions, especially related to employment and education, is based upon merit. Mm-hmm. However, there are conditions where some of those other traits that are not listed can be considered. So only those that have been specifically identified as a protected trait that you cannot discriminate against should not be considered. Now, many of those other traits that are not enumerated can be what we call proxies for race, or proxy for age, or proxy for discrimination. So there are ways that things that have not been enumerated can still fall under a form of discrimination, but only those that are identified as related to a trait, one that we have identified that cannot be discriminated against, are unlawful.
So I think I'm with you, and I think what you're asking is whether the exhaustive list of the 21 categories is in fact the limit of what we protect. I think the answer is no, but let me go back and study that and call you on it.
The last question I have, which is sort of outside of what you presented, and only in a few minutes that are left, do you want to tell us what is going on with your office and the Trump Hotel? You have, I think, 2 cases involving that.
Yeah, I'll be really brief there. So in the emoluments case, that's the first case that we brought way back when with Maryland Attorney General Brian Frosch. The lower court ruled in our favor that the case could go forward. We issued 38 subpoenas. At that point, the Department of Justice, really in an unprecedented move, went directly to the Fourth Circuit successfully for an appeal. We lost 3-0 at the Fourth Circuit. We asked the entire Fourth Circuit to rehear the case. All of the judges, all 15, 14 were able to hear the case en banc recently in December. I think our Solicitor General did an extraordinary job. I'm hopeful that we'll win that emoluments case. The second matter is a matter brought against the President's inaugural committee. And the allegation in a nutshell there is that the inaugural committee is a not-for-profit organization not-for-profit organizations are organizations of public trust. That's why they get a bunch of benefits, including not having to pay taxes, but there are requirements that come with the benefits. One of the basic requirements is that a not-for-profit not waste its assets. What our investigation, documents, emails, witness testimony to us clearly reveal, unfortunately, is that the Trump Hotel and related companies were looking to the Presidential Inaugural Committee not as a not-for-profit, but as an opportunity to charge it exponentially higher rates than it would charge in a regular marketplace. I'll give you one example, and I gave that example to Mr. Seagraves last week, and that is this. In one instance, the Presidential Inaugural Committee agreed to pay $175,000 for event space at the Trump Hotel. Interestingly, that event space was double booked to another not-for-profit. Well, that not-for-profit paid the actual market price, $5,000. So, any not-for-profit that does that would be sued or confronted with it would settle quickly. And that's what we sought to do there. Unfortunately, we didn't have a willing settling party, so we're in court.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
And I think that concludes this morning.
All right. Thank you
all.
very much.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you.